Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast. I'm your host, Bob Bouthillier. This podcast, my website, and my weekly newsletter are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who subscribe to our AI Fusion Kickstarter program and those who leverage AI Fusion product development and coaching to bring human-centered AI into their organizations. You can find us at www.innoguide.net. In this episode, number 76, we'll be sharing AI in 2026, Skills, Agents, Trust, and the Cost of Pretending We Understand AI. This is a synthesis of a number of sources that I put together because I couldn't find single resources in new enough books that cover this scope of AI. So I've put this together and I hope you enjoy it. This includes reference content from the World Economic Forum, The Future of Jobs, Core Skills for 2030, McKinsey Quantum Black Report, 1 Year of Agentic AI, 6 Lessons from People Doing the Work, The Design of AI in 2026, the Design of AI podcast. Episodes are cited explicitly with attribution, and Gartner, Microsoft Research, Stanford, Stack Overflow. I quote these different resources as the entries come up. And it took all of these resources to put together the information that I wanted to present today. So I hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. Let's get started. What you're about to hear is not a trend review, a tool roundup, or a prediction episode. This is a synthesis. Over the past few years, artificial intelligence has moved from curiosity to capability to something much more consequential. AI is no longer a differentiator. It's becoming infrastructure, quietly reshaping how work gets done, how decisions are made, and how responsibility is distributed inside our organizations. And that shift is happening faster than most leadership models were designed to handle. In fact, it's happening faster than any of us guessed it would happen. The real divide we're seeing now is not between companies that use AI versus those that don't. It's between organizations that have rethought how they create value and those who have simply layered AI on top of existing structures, incentives, and workflows. This is a really important distinction. So this series brings together current thinking from people who are actually doing the work: product leaders, designers, engineers, researchers, executives, shipping AI systems in the real world. It draws heavily from the design of AI conversations and research, from insights shared by teams at companies like HubSpot, Shopify, Atlassian, and others, from global perspectives like the World Economic Forum's Future Skills work, and from practitioner research published by groups like McKinsey, Gartner, Microsoft Research, and Stanford. But this is not about quoting reports. It's about connecting the dots that are usually discussed in isolation. I've had a lot of these discussions, but they were so disconnected, I decided to put them together in a single paper in a single podcast, and that's what I'm doing today. So these dots that are usually discussed in isolation include workforce disruption, trust and recoverability, agentic systems, discovery shortcuts, engineering fragility, model risk, interface design, and incentives and accountability. Put together, they tell a much more uncomfortable and much more useful story. This is a long-form executive guide to understanding what actually changed, why so many AI initiatives are struggling, and what credible leadership looks like as we move into 2026. I've divided this into 2 sections. Part 1 is about what broke, and Part 2 is about what actually works. If you're looking for hype, this is not your episode. But if you're responsible for building products, leading terms, governing risk, or making decisions that will still matter 3 years from now, I think this podcast is for you. So let's talk about Part 1. What broke and why leadership is the constraint. Part 1 focuses on the failures we're already living with, many of which we didn't recognize as failures at the time. We start by looking at how AI is compressing skills ladders faster than organizations can adapt. quietly deleting the apprenticeship pathways that produce judgment and experience. If we don't have apprentices, we don't get experienced people in our workforce later on. So we explore why the skills that matter most now are not technical skills, but sense-making, common sense skills in your business, and why reskilling alone won't solve the problem. From there, we examine a critical mental model error, treating AI like a feature instead of infrastructure. We'll talk about how that framing creates what many teams are now experiencing as AI debt, systems that look impressive but are fragile, they're hard to govern, and they're difficult to trust. We then move into agentic systems and why they fail so often, not because the models are weak, but because organizations never formalized meaning, decision rights, or accountability. Agents don't create clarity. They amplify whatever confusion already exists. I'm going to say that again because I see this over and over again. They don't create clarity. They amplify what you've already got. From there, we look at trust, not as tone or as experience polish, but as recoverability. The most dangerous AI systems aren't the ones people distrust. They're the ones people stop checking. We also examine discovery theater and the growing temptation to replace real customers with synthetic ones. AI can accelerate synthesis, but it cannot replace accountability. And when teams confuse the two, they end up shipping confident failures. Part 1 closes by reframing the real gap organizations face today. It's not an AI literacy gap. It's a leadership literacy gap. AI isn't breaking organizations. It's revealing what they never fully understood about themselves. So let's get started. Part 1, Chapter 1. The quiet shift no one staffed for. Let me start with a question that tends to make executive teams uncomfortable when I ask it out loud. If your org chart froze today, no hiring, no backfilling, no consulting help, how long would your company remain competent? Not profitable, not innovative, competent. Because the change happening right now is not just technological, it's structural, and it's happening quietly enough that many leadership teams still believe they have time, but they don't. One of the clearest signals comes from a chart many of you have already seen, the World Economic Forum's Core Skills for 2030. At first glance, it looks like just another skills forecast, a familiar 4-quadrant chart, skills rising, skills declining, blah, blah, blah. Skills becoming core, skills drifting out of focus. But if you look at it carefully, it's not actually about skills at all. It's about how work itself is being reorganized. You'll notice that AI and big data still sit high and to the right, upper right quadrant, no big surprise there. But clustered tightly around them are systems thinking, creative thinking, analytical reasoning, curiosity, resilience, and self-awareness. These aren't technical skills. They're integrative skills. They exist at the intersections. That clustering tells less linear, less tolerant of narrow roles. For decades, organizations scaled by decomposing work. Junior people executed predefined tasks. Senior people made decisions. Middle layers coordinated, reviewed, and escalated things. AI just collapsed that ladder. And this is where most organizations are misreading the moment. The dominant narrative says AI will free people up for higher value work. It sounds optimistic. It sounds humane. It also obscures the real risk. Because in practice, AI is not freeing people up. It's compressing roles faster than organizations can redesign how people learn. This insight shows up repeatedly in The Design of AI in 2026, a synthesis drawn from dozens of conversations with product leaders, designers, researchers, and executives who are actually shipping AI systems in production. Across those conversations, a consistent pattern emerges. The first work to be automated is production work, not because it's the least valuable, because it's the easiest to justify. Production work is measurable, automatable, defensible at a budget meeting. It's also where judgment is formed. Production work is where people learn how systems fail, where they encounter edge cases, where they develop taste, where they see the cost of being almost right. When organizations remove that layer without rebuilding the learning pathways it supported, they don't become more efficient, they become more fragile. This is the part leaders rarely want to hear. By automating production without redesigning apprenticeship, you are manufacturing future incompetence. The Design of AI podcast explored this explicitly in episodes examining the labor market impacts of generative AI. What looks like efficiency today is actually a deletion of the pipeline that produces senior judgment tomorrow. Mid-level roles collapse, entry-level exposure shrinks, and suddenly organizations are asking why there's a shortage of people who can make good decisions under ambiguity. The answer is painfully simple. You optimize them away. The World Economic Forum chart reinforces this if you know how to read it. Look at the so-called out-of-focus skills: manual dexterity, sensory processing, endurance. These aren't disappearing from the world, they're disappearing from leverage positions. But here's the more subtle shift. Organizations are unintentionally pushing learning itself into the same quadrant, not by intention, by neglect. Because learning takes time, it takes redundancy, it takes slack, it takes review. AI-accelerated systems don't naturally leave room for those things unless leaders design them back in, and most haven't. Instead, they assume skills can be reskilled on demand, that judgment can be trained via short courses, that context can be absorbed without lived experience. It can't. Judgment is not information. It's accumulated consequence. It's how we learned from making mistakes. Another uncomfortable reality: many organizations believe that they are preparing for the future because they are upskilling individuals. But the future isn't asking for better individual contributors. It's asking for coherent organizations. Organizations where decision rights are clear, escalation paths exist, review is valued, not penalized, and humans still see enough of the system to understand its failure modes. When those conditions disappear, skill lists stop mattering. That's why the World Economic Forum chart should be read less as a training roadmap and more as a warning label. The skills rising fastest are the ones required to operate inside complex, partially automated systems without losing situational awareness. There's a whole paper entitled Situational Awareness, by the way. Systems thinking, creative reasoning, resilience, curiosity. These aren't traits you bolt on at the end of a transformation. They're capabilities you either cultivate structurally or you don't get them at all. And this brings us to the most provocative truth of this AI era. The organizations that struggle most with AI are not the ones lacking technical talent. They're the ones that never redesigned how people become competent. AI didn't break your workforce model. It exposed that it was already brittle. If part one of the series has a thesis, this is it. The AI shift is not primarily a technology shift. It's a capability production crisis. And unless leaders start treating skill development as an organizational design problem, not an HR initiative, the gap between those who adapt and those who don't will widen faster than any reskilling program can close it. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about how this misreading of skills feeds directly into another costly mistake: treating AI like a feature instead of infrastructure, and why that framing guarantees disappointment. Chapter 2. AI is no longer a feature, it's infrastructure, and infrastructure changes what leadership is responsible for. One of the most subtle and damaging mistakes leaders are making right now is that they're evaluating AI progress using the wrong lens. They're still asking feature questions. What did we ship? Where is AI visible in the product? How many teams are using it? Good questions. Those questions made sense in the SaaS era. They made sense when software value came from adding capabilities on top of stable systems, but they don't make sense in the agentic era. Because AI is no longer just doing things inside your systems. It's starting to participate in how work is coordinated across them. And that changes what leadership is responsible for. McKinsey's Quantum Black Group makes this point clearly in their analysis of 1 year of agentic AI in practice. The organizations seeing real value are not the ones shipping the most AI features. They're the ones rethinking how decisions are made, how work flows, and how responsibility is assigned when machines start acting, not just advising. That's a very different transformation than most boards think they approved. In the design of AI in 2026, this shows up as a recurring failure mode. Organizations feel pressure, often intense pressure, to demonstrate AI momentum. Have a pilot, somebody wants to see what the results are for that, and that momentum gets interpreted visually. Co-pilots, chat interfaces, automated workflows. Look what we launched. But what rarely changes is the underlying systems those features sit on. Decision rights remain informal. Escalation paths remain political. Ownership remains ambiguous, and failure recovery remains undocumented. AI gets layered on top of all of that, and leaders are surprised when outcomes disappoint. Here's the uncomfortable truth executives need to internalize. If you can't clearly explain how a decision gets made today, AI will not improve it. It will simply make the consequences arrive faster. This is where the concept of AI debt becomes essential. Because AI debt is not about model choice or architecture, it's a technical problem you can assign to engineering. AI debt is what accumulates when organizations deploy automation without redesigning accountability. It shows up when AI systems are allowed to act, but no one owns the outcome. Models are embedded in workflows without clarity on override authority. Automation replaces human review without redefining responsibilities. And leaders celebrate speed while quietly losing visibility. From the outside, this looks like progress. From the inside, though, it becomes fragility, and fragility is the opposite of what infrastructure is supposed to deliver. Infrastructure is boring by design. It's predictable, it's constrained, it fails gracefully, it has clear ownership. You don't demo your payroll system at an all-hands meeting. You don't experiment casually with audit trails, and you don't move fast and see what happens with safety controls. Yet many organizations are doing exactly that with AI, because they're still treating it like a feature. McKinsey's work reinforces this distinction. The highest performing AI deployments aren't the flashiest. They're the ones where AI becomes invisible because it's embedded into workflows that were redesigned first. Not optimized, redesigned. This requires leaders to confront something they often avoid. Most workflows only work today because humans are compensating for the ambiguity. Humans notice when inputs go weird. Humans notice when a rule shouldn't apply. They escalate informally when something feels off. AI does none of that unless you design it in explicitly, which leads to a provocative but critical reframe. Every place AI adds efficiency without redefining responsibility is a place where you are borrowing reliability from people without realizing it. That reliability disappears the moment humans disengage, and disengagement is exactly what automation encourages when it's framed incorrectly. This is why so many organizations experience a strange pattern. AI pilots perform well in early phases and then stall or regress in production. The issue isn't model quality, it's that no one redesigned the system to operate without humans continuously patching the systems. In the design of AI in 2026, leaders repeatedly describe a growing sense of unease after deployment. Things work until they don't. And when they don't, no one is quite sure who is accountable. That's not a technical gap, it's a leadership gap. Infrastructure changes what leadership means. When AI becomes infrastructure, leaders are no longer just sponsors of innovation, they become stewards of the decision-making systems. That stewardship includes answering questions many organizations have deferred for years. Who is allowed to decide what and when? Under what conditions does automation slow down or stop? How do we detect silent failure? What does recovery look like when the system is wrong but confident? If those questions are uncomfortable, that's the point. AI is not exposing new weaknesses. It's removing the buffers that used to hide the old ones, the people. And this is where the feature mindset becomes actively dangerous, because features are judged by adoption and usage. Infrastructure is judged by resilience. A feature can fail and be rolled back quietly. Infrastructure failures are visible, systematic, and reputational. You could be risking your brand on an infrastructure failure. Yet many boards are still asking for AI roadmaps that look like feature lists rather than risk maps. They want to know, what are we building? They should be asking, what are we now responsible for? McKinsey's agentic AI research makes it clear, as systems gain autonomy, responsibility does not disappear, it concentrates. I want to say that again. As systems gain autonomy, responsibility doesn't disappear, it concentrates. Either leaders define accountability deliberately, or it emerges implicitly in the worst possible moments. This leads to a final provocative insight for this chapter. If your AI strategy can be summarized by what it enables, but not by what it forbids, it is not a strategy, it's an aspiration. Infrastructure always has limits, it always has guardrails, and it always has owners. Organizations that treat AI like infrastructure early will feel slower at first. They will ship less visibly. They will say no more often. And they will outperform in the long run because they won't spend the next 3 years paying down AI debt they didn't realize they were accumulating. The next chapter, we'll look at where many infrastructure efforts break down completely the moment organizations try to introduce agents into systems that were never designed with explicit meaning, authority, or decision rights. That's where clarity becomes not just helpful, but mandatory. Chapter 3. Agents don't create clarity, they amplify confusion. Why the challenge of getting people to agree on a common set of terms and their precise meanings and relationships across different departments and systems is becoming a leadership problem, not a technical one. The essence of this chapter is why the challenge of getting people to agree on a common set of terms and their precise meanings and relationships across departments and systems is now a leadership problem, not a technical one. There's a moment that almost every organization deploying agents reaches, and it usually arrives faster than expected. The agent works. Technically, everything is fine. The model responds correctly, tools execute, system does exactly what it was asked to do. Yay, everybody's happy. But something feels wrong. People hesitate. Teams start adding manual checks. Executives ask for just a little more oversight. Progress slows, not because the technology failed, but because confidence drops. This is the moment when organizations realize they don't actually understand how their own decisions are made. And AI didn't create that problem. It just exposed it. To understand why this happens, we have to talk about a word that's going to become increasingly unavoidable in executive conversations over the next few years: ontology. Ontology sounds academic, but the idea is this. It's the shared understanding of what exists in your organization, what those things are allowed to do, how they relate to one another, and who has authority when they conflict. Customers, accounts, orders, tickets, policies, permissions, escalations, exceptions. Every organization has its ontology, whether you document it or not. Humans navigate this mess intuitively. We rely on experience, context, and social signals to fill in the gaps. We know when to bend a rule. We know when to ask when things feel off. We know which policies matter and which ones are more aspirational, which ones don't. Agents don't have that luxury. As the design of AI in 2026 makes clear, most agentic AI failures are not caused by weak models or bad prompts. They're caused by organizations never formalizing meaning, ownership, and decision rights in the first place. In the design of AI in 2026, humans were compensating, and AI removes the compensation. And suddenly, ambiguity became operational. This is why agents feel magical in demos and terrifying in production. In the demo world, the world is clean, inputs are well-formed, edge cases are controlled, authority is implicit. In real organizations, though, ambiguity is everywhere, and it's often how work actually gets done. Here's the provocative truth most leaders resist. Agents don't automate work. They automate unresolved conflict. Every unclear policy, every contradictory incentive, every will decide case-by-case workaround. At scale, at speed, without hesitation. If two teams disagree about ownership, an agent will pick one, or oscillate unpredictably. If policies conflict, an agent will follow whichever is encoded most literally. If escalation paths are informal, an agent will bypass them entirely. Not because it's reckless, because it's doing exactly what you told it to do. This is where many organizations start blaming the AI, but the AI is just holding up a mirror. In the design of AI in 2026, leaders describe this moment as deeply uncomfortable. Systems that worked fine before suddenly feel brittle. Long-standing processes that relied on human judgment start breaking when agents enforce consistency. This is not a failure of intelligence, it's a failure of governance. And it explains why analysts like Gartner are already predicting that a significant portion of agentic AI initiatives will be abandoned over the next few years. Not because agents aren't powerful, but because organizations are unprepared to make their decision logic explicit. AI forces clarity. Most organizations are built on ambiguity. For decades, ambiguity was a feature, not a bug. It allowed flexibility, it allowed politics, it allowed experienced people to smooth over contradictions quietly. Agents eliminate that buffer, which leads to a question every executive deploying agents should be able to answer, and most can't. When the agent makes a decision, whose decision is it? If the answer is the system, you already have a problem. Because accountability doesn't disappear when work is automated, it concentrates. And if accountability is unclear, trust collapses. That's why ontology is not a technical exercise delegated to engineering, it's a leadership responsibility. Ontology requires leaders to articulate things they've often avoided stating explicitly. What decisions are truly owned centrally versus locally? Which rules can't be violated and which are contextual? Where exceptions are allowed and who approves them? What outcomes matter when trade-offs arise? Humans can live with fuzzy answers to those questions, but agents cannot. And here's another provocative insight that often lands hard with leadership teams. If your organization cannot explain its own decision-making without referencing people by name, it's not ready for agents. We trust Sarah to handle that. John usually knows when to. There's social patches, and that's fine, but AI doesn't understand instinct. It understands structure. That's why so many early agentic deployments end up being quietly constrained, throttled, or rolled back. Leaders sense that something's off, not because outcomes are immediately disastrous, but because the system feels ungovernable. They can't predict it, they can't explain it, and they can't confidently defend it. It's not a deterministic system, so they slow it down. Not intentionally, instinctively. This is where organizations either do the hard work or retreat. The hard work is making the implicit explicit, defining entities clearly, mapping decision rights, formalizing escalation, designing rollback paths. This is not glamorous work. It doesn't demo well, and it rarely shows up as a bullet point on an AI roadmap. But without it, agents don't scale. They just expose dysfunction faster than humans ever could. And that leads to a final uncomfortable reframing in this chapter. Agents are not an efficiency upgrade. They're an organizational audit. They surface where authority is unclear, they reveal where incentives conflict, and they make visible what humans were quietly compensating for. Organizations that embrace that audit, that treat agents as a force function for clarity, will emerge stronger, even if progress feels slower at first. Organizations that ignore it will oscillate between excitement and fear, never quite trusting the systems they built. In the next chapter, we'll talk about where this loss of trust becomes most dangerous, when confidence is mistaken for reliability, and when organizations optimize for adoption instead of recoverability. That's where AI failures stop being internal problems and start becoming public ones. Chapter 4. Trust is a feeling. Trust is not a feeling. It's a recovery mechanism. Why confidence is cheap and why overtrust is the real risk. Trust is one of the most misunderstood words in the AI conversation. Most organizations talk about trust as if it's a surface property, something you design into the interface, friendly language, human tone, polite explanations, a reassuring voice that makes the system feel approachable. That's not trust. That's persuasion. Trust in real systems is not about how something feels when it's working. It's about what happens after it fails. And in the agentic era, failure is no longer a rare edge case. It's inevitable, because systems are now acting, not just suggesting. This is where many leadership teams start to feel a quiet sense of unease, even if they can't quite articulate why. Early pilots look good. User adoption is strong. The AI sounds confident. The outputs look plausible, and yet something doesn't sit just right. People double-check the system just in case. Managers ask for shadow reviews. Executives request manual overrides without knowing why they'd actually use them. What they're reacting to is not a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of recoverability. As highlighted repeatedly in The Design of AI in 2026, teams working in high-stakes environments, like medical products and with medical clients, public services, healthcare, finance, infrastructure, they converge on the same insight. The most dangerous AI systems are not the ones users distrust. They're the ones users stop paying attention to. Overtrust is the real risk. When systems appear confident and fluent, people disengage. They assume the machine has it handled. And disengagement is where small errors quietly compound into systemic failures. This is a pattern I've seen before, long before AI. Aviation didn't become safer because pilots trusted autopilot more. It became safer because the systems were designed around shared authority, clear handoffs, and explicit recovery paths. AI systems rarely are designed this way. Here's the provocative truth leaders need to confront. Confidence scales faster than reliability. Modern AI systems are extraordinarily good at sounding right. They love to make you happy. They are not inherently good at knowing when they're wrong, unless you design for that explicitly. And most organizations don't. Instead, they optimize for adoption. They want the AI to feel helpful, natural, effortless. But effortlessness comes at a cost, awareness. When users don't understand what a system is doing or why, they also don't know when to intervene. This is why trust cannot be designed as a UI problem. It's a systems problem. Trustworthy AI systems make uncertainty visible. They expose confidence levels. They slow down when stakes rise. They make reversibility obvious, and they explain themselves after failure, not just before success. The last part matters more than most teams realize. If your AI system can explain what it's doing when everything goes well, but becomes opaque when something breaks, it's not trustworthy, it's fragile. In the design of AI 2026, practitioners describe a recurring failure mode, systems that perform adequately under normal conditions but collapse under stress. Not because the model degrades, but because the organization never designed for error handling at scale. Humans handle errors socially. AI handles them structurally. And the structure either exists or it doesn't. That leads to a subtle but critical leadership mistake. Many organizations treat trust as something that must be earned before automation is expanded. They want users to get comfortable first. They want confidence to build. But in reality, trust is earned after things go wrong. The moment that defines trust is not the first successful outcome, it's the first failure and how it responds to that failure. Did it surface the issue quickly? Did it preserve context? Did it allow recovery without blame? Did it make clear what happened and why? Or did it fail silently, leaving humans to reconstruct events after the fact? Here's an uncomfortable insight most people miss. If your AI system cannot be confidently debugged by the people accountable for its outcomes, it's not production ready, no matter how impressive the demos look. This is where overtrust becomes corrosive. Systems that appear competent encourage disengagement and erodes situational awareness. And when awareness disappears, organizations lose their ability to respond effectively under pressure. That's why leaders should be far more concerned about AI that just works rather than AI that occasionally asks for help. A system that asks for confirmation may feel slower. A system that surfaces uncertainty may feel less polished. And a system that pauses for review may feel inefficient. But those systems preserve human judgment, and judgment is the scarce resource in complex environments. Trustworthy AI does not replace judgment, it protects it. And this is where many AI roadmaps go wrong. They frame trust as a user experience goal rather than an operational requirement. They ask, how do we make users comfortable? They should be asking, how do we make failure survivable? Because in real organizations, failure is not binary, it's gradual. It accumulates through small, plausible errors that no one notices until it's too late. AI systems that don't surface those errors early don't just fail, they fail politically. They create blame. They create defensiveness. They erode confidence, not just in the system, but in leadership. And once that happens, progress stalls. This leads to a final, provocative reframing for this chapter. Trust is not about believing the system is right. It's about knowing what to do when it isn't. Organizations that design for recoverability, that treat trust as an operational property rather than a branding exercise, will move slower at first. They'll ask harder questions, they'll ship fewer wow moments, but they will survive first contact with reality. In the next chapter, we'll look at one of the fastest ways organizations undermine trust without realizing it, replacing a real human discovery with synthetic certainty and mistaking speed for learning. That's where confidence turns into self-deception, and where AI starts telling teams exactly what they want to hear. Chapter 5. Discovery Theater and the Synthetic User Trap. Why speed without accountability produces confident failure. There's a particular kind of confidence that shows up in AI-powered product teams, and it should make leaders nervous. Roadmaps look sharper, insights arrive faster, user feedback appears instantly, decisions feel data-backed and decisive. And yet when those products meet the real world, something goes wrong. Adoption lags, trust erodes, customers behave in ways no one predicted. What's happening in those moments isn't a failure of intelligence, it's a failure of discovery. As AI tools become more capable, many organizations are quietly replacing engagement with simulation. They are talking less to real customers and more to synthetic ones. AI-generated personas, AI-generated interviews, AI-generated insights about AI-generated behavior. On paper, it looks efficient. In practice, it's what the design of AI in 2026 calls discovery theater, the appearance of learning without the discipline of accountability. Discovery theater feels productive. It generates artifacts, it fills slides, it creates the illusion of certainty. What it does not do is confront teams with reality. Teresa Torres, author of Continuous Discovery Habits, has been unambiguous about this point in her conversations on the Design of AI podcast and elsewhere. As long as we're building for humans, humans must remain part of the discovery process. Synthetic users, she argues, can support limited exploration, but they can't replace real engagement because they are ultimately reflections of what teams already believe. That distinction matters more in the AI era than it ever did before, because AI systems are exceptionally good at pattern completion. They generate responses based on training data and prompts that encode existing assumptions. When teams use AI to simulate users, they are not discovering unmet needs, they are amplifying their own mental models. Talk about an echo chamber. And the feedback feels great because nothing pushes back. Glenn McDonald, former data lead at Spotify, has warned explicitly about this closed-loop risk. When AI generates insights and AI validates them, teams end up with systems that support internal bias rather than external truth. The model isn't lying, it's doing exactly what it was trained to do, reinforce patterns. The problem is that the patterns are not needs. And this is where discovery theater becomes dangerous. Real discovery is uncomfortable, it's slow, it introduces doubt, it forces trade-offs. Synthetic discovery does the opposite. It accelerates alignment around ideas that haven't been tested, and it wraps them in statistical confidence. Here's the provocative truth you need to hear. AI does not make bad assumptions obvious. It makes them scalable. When organizations replace human discovery with synthetic certainty, they remove the one mechanism that forces humility into decision-making. And humility is not a soft value here, it's a risk control. The Nielsen-Norman Group addressed this directly in their 2024 guidance on synthetic users. Their position is careful and nuanced. Synthetic users can be useful for early-stage ideation or stress testing hypotheses, but they become dangerous when teams mistake them for reality, especially when those synthetic users are trained on historical data that already reflects bias, exclusion, or outdated behavior. More recent research, including late 2025 studies on AI and UX research, reinforces this concern. Synthetic users tend to reproduce normative patterns from training data rather than surface novel insights. They are particularly poor at revealing edge cases, emotional resistance, or unmet needs that fall outside dominant narratives. In other words, they're good at telling you what usually happens and terrible at telling you what matters next. This is why discovery theater often produces confident roadmaps that fail in the market. Teams feel aligned, executives feel reassured, decisions feel justified, and then customers behave unexpectedly. The behavior wasn't unexpected, it was simply never observed. Pattern shows up repeatedly in this Design of AI 2026. Organizations talk about accelerating discovery, but what they've really accelerated is synthesis. They're summarizing faster, clustering themes faster, producing artifacts faster, but synthesis without input is not discovery, it's interpretation. And interpretation without accountability drifts. Here's where the AI era raises the stakes. When discovery fails in traditional product development, teams ship the wrong feature. When discovery fails in AI-enabled systems, teams encode the wrong assumptions into automation. And those assumptions now act at scale. It's not just a product risk, it's a trust risk. Customers experience systems that feel confident, but they're misaligned with what they want. They sense that something doesn't quite fit their reality, and when they push back, the system doesn't listen because it was never designed to. This leads to a subtle but powerful erosion of trust, not because the system is hostile, because it's indifferent. And here's another provocative insight that you should sit with. AI doesn't remove the need for accountability, it concentrates it. The moment teams stop talking to real users, they also stop being accountable to them. Decisions become internally validated rather than externally grounded. And when things go wrong, there is no one to point to and say, "We heard this directly." Instead, there's a model, a simulation, confidence score, and none of those can be held accountable. This is why the most effective organizations are not abandoning AI in discovery, they're rescoping it. They use AI to accelerate synthesis of real interviews, surface patterns across large qualitative data sets, challenge assumptions by generating alternative interpretations. But they don't allow AI to replace the human act of listening, because listening is not about efficiency, it's about responsibility. When a real customer says, "This isn't good enough," it creates obligation. It forces teams to respond, not just optimize. Synthetic users never create that obligation because they never push back. And that's the core risk of discovery theater. It produces speed without responsibility, confidence without humility, and alignment without truth. As the design of AI in 2026 puts it, AI can speed synthesis, but it cannot replace the accountability that comes from hearing a real human say, "You missed." Organizations that understand this will use AI as a powerful amplifier of learning, not as a substitute for it. Organizations that don't will keep shipping systems that feel impressive, look intelligent, and quietly fail to connect with the people they're meant to serve. In the next chapter, we'll examine what happens when that same pattern, speed over accountability, shows up in engineering itself. When code becomes cheap, but quality becomes invisible, and when organizations mistake velocity for resilience, that's where the cost of confident failures becomes impossible to ignore. Chapter 6. The real skill gap is leadership literacy. Why AI is exposing what we never bothered to learn. As we close part 1, it's worth stepping back and asking a harder question than most AI conversations allow. If AI capability were suddenly frozen at today's level, no better models, no cheaper inference, no new breakthroughs, which organizations would still succeed? That question cuts through a lot of hype because it reveals something many leaders are reluctant to confront. The biggest constraint on AI effectiveness in 2026 is not technology, it's leadership literacy. Not literacy in prompts or literacy in tooling, but literacy in how organizations actually function. The World Economic Forum's Core Skills for 2030 chart offers a useful lens here, but only if we read it correctly. The skills rising fastest: systems thinking, analytical reasoning, creative thinking, resilience, self-awareness, are not AI skills in the narrow sense. They are sense-making skills. They are the skills required to operate inside complex, partially automated systems without losing situational awareness. That's the key point. AI is not eliminating complexity, it's redistributing it. Tasks got easier, coordination gets harder, decisions get faster, consequences get larger. This is why so many organizations feel like they are doing AI, and yet making less sense of their own systems than before. They've optimized execution without upgrading comprehension. As the design of AI in 2026 makes clear, the organizations struggling most are not the ones lacking access to models. They're the ones that cannot clearly explain how work actually happens inside their walls. Who decides what, when, based on what signals, with what authority, and with what fallback when things go wrong? For years, leaders could get away with vague answers to those questions because humans filled in the gaps. Experience, intuition, and informal escalation masked structural ambiguity. That was fine at the time, but AI removes that mask. And this is where leadership literacy becomes the real differentiator. McKinsey's Quantum Black research on agentic AI reinforces this point from a different angle. As systems begin to act autonomously, responsibility does not disappear, it concentrates. Someone must be accountable for decisions that now happen faster, at greater scale, and with less friction. Yet, many executives still talk about AI as if it's an efficiency upgrade rather than a governance shift. They ask, how do we move faster? They should be asking, what are we now responsible for that we weren't before? The mismatch shows up everywhere. Organizations invest in co-pilots, but not in escalation design. They deploy agents, but not in decision ownership. They optimize for adoption, but not for recoverability. They measure output, but not coherence. When things start to feel unstable, they blame the technology. This is the provocative truth you need to absorb. AI didn't create your organizational confusion, it just made it operational. The skill gap, then, is not about learning how AI works. We're all learning that. It's about learning how your organization works, honestly, explicitly, and under pressure. Leadership literacy in the AI era means being able to articulate things many leaders have historically not had to do. It means being able to say, this is what our system is allowed to do. This is what it's not allowed to do. This is who is accountable when it fails. This is how we recover without blame. Those statements sound simple, but they're not. They force trade-offs. They surface conflicts. They expose incentives that don't align. And that's precisely why they matter. In the design of AI in 2026, one of the strongest through lines is that AI amplifies whatever organizations are already optimizing for. If you optimize for speed, AI gives you speed and fragility. If you optimize for cost cutting, AI gives you cost reduction and capability collapse. If you optimize for engagement, AI gives you engagement and manipulation risk. AI does not inject values, it scales incentives, which means leadership can no longer hide behind abstraction. You can't delegate ethics to a model, and you can't outsource accountability to a vendor, nor can you rely on best practices when your system behaves in unexpected ways. Leadership literacy in 2026 requires a willingness to confront these uncomfortable truths, that some processes only work because people compensate quietly, that some decisions are intentionally ambiguous to avoid conflict, and that some forms of efficiency are actually borrowing resilience from humans. AI calls those debts due. And this is why the most dangerous phrase in executive AI conversations today is, we'll deal with that later. Later is where compounded risk lives. The organizations that will succeed are not the ones with the most advanced models. They're the ones that are willing to slow down long enough to understand themselves. They will simplify stacks instead of adding layers. They'll clarify ownership instead of relying on heroics. They'll design for failure instead of assuming success. And they'll resist the pressure to automate what they do not yet understand. This is not anti-AI. This is pro-responsibility. And it sets up the transition into part two. Because if part one has been about what broke, skills, pipelines, decision clarity, trust, discovery, and leadership assumptions, part two is what actually works in practice. We'll explore why engineering advantage shifts from writing code to auditing systems. Taste and standards become infrastructure, not nice-to-haves. Chat is a temporary interface, not the future. Provenance and model risk become competitive differentiators. And why the leaders who win in 2026 are the ones who know what not to automate. The AI era is not a test of ambition, it's a test of honesty. And the organizations that pass are the ones willing to stop pretending they understand systems they've never fully examined. That's where real advantage begins. So that's where part one ends. Part two will shift from diagnosis to practice. And this is where we'll focus on what's actually working and why. I hope you'll be back for that. Remember, our website is innoguide.net, where I have many resources for innovators, people who want to build medical products with or without embedded AI, those who want to use AI in their development process, and those who want to do automations, accounting for the kind of risk that we're talking about here. You'll be learning it from someone who's worked in medtech for 30 years and has been using large language models since they emerged in 2022. I've also shipped medical products with embedded machine learning models in the products for almost 10 years now. I want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this. I want to thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you next time. That's a wrap.